something I learned really early on in my career was people don't get rich from their salary. You go out, build your own business. I think we have all the tools in the world at low cost to be able to go spin up a product online, a digital service, got the ways to process payments, which was one of the biggest friction points in terms of starting an online business before. Paint your own picture. Don't let someone else dictate that for you. I feel quite passionate about that because not everyone gets the opportunity to get a look in. Not everyone has the network to open their doors for them. And having come from that sort of path myself, I'm a big believer in being able to create your own opportunity.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Ways to Wealth. Today I am joined by Matt. Matt, why don't you give us the TLDR on who you are and what you work on?
Sure. I'm Matt Hardy. I've been in and around startups for the last 10 plus years here in New Zealand. And I guess the TLDR is that, primarily my day-to-day function is marketing, but I like to think about it as sort of connecting the dots between amazing products and the people that need them.
Yeah, that's cool. That's definitely going to be fun for me to talk about for the next wee while and learn from you. So you've kind of got into startups. You've been in there for 10 years. It seems like you kind of moved into that scene early in your career. What was the driver for kind of exploring startups and getting exposure to them for the last 10 years, and kind of what have some of the learnings been? And I guess maybe we'll then go on to, where things are going and what that looks like. So yeah, what was kind of the intrigue?
Yeah, sure. So once upon a time when I was a bit younger and maybe a little bit more naive, I had just finished up a political science degree at Vic Uni down in Wellington.
Mm-hmm.
And being a young and impressionable guy, I thought maybe I could go in and do some good from within government. It turns out that perhaps that wasn't necessarily for me. And following some of my friends into, the Ministry of Foreign Trade wasn't perhaps the thing that lit my fire necessarily. So I guess the way I sort of ended up in marketing initially was I wanted to get a job, basically doing the things I enjoyed, which at that very specific time was drinking coffee and being on Facebook. So I wanted to figure out how to get paid to do that. I took a few interesting twists and turns and had to, for lack of a better word, had a bit of a baptism of fire when I landed my first real sort of adult marketing job, where I got pulled in as a social media manager for the Cricket World Cup launch here in New Zealand.
Oh yeah.
So a fresh-faced kid with no real marketing experience getting pulled into this, what is still the third most viewed sporting event in the world, and managing, a community of approximately, I think it was about 80 million people across all our channels. And yeah, it was a bit of getting thrown into the fire, but gave me a taste for, seeing how things work at scale, honestly, seeing the way the cogs turn, the way decisions get made. I got a look in to see how, these major decisions were being made. I project managed the website, built out these plans for the social media calendar, all these types of good things, right? But one of my biggest takeaways from that particular job was getting to work sort of and get exposure to a pretty legendary Kiwi, to be honest, Dame Therese Walsh, who at that time was the head of Cricket World Cup for New Zealand, and seeing how she operated. I'd never had real exposure to that kind of level of expertise before. And what was really cool was being able to see the way she turned up every day and then sort of being able to apply that to myself, and the way she treated people in particular, which was really interesting. And yeah, I guess I got a little bit lucky afterward, where had a pretty reasonable sized brand name on my CV after that. Yeah, but I guess my story of getting into startups in particular was driven by this, thing that was happening around us at that time. I might be showing my age a little bit, but Facebook had recently gone public. There was massive, it was when Twitter was still called Twitter, and Jack Dorsey was running the show.
That's right. That's different. That's a different vibe.
It was a very different time on the internet, and I thought, wow, like these people were able to create exponential sort of career velocity or like earning velocity via the software, right? Like, when you sort of step back and you think about like the unit economics and the way how quickly these companies scale is quite incredible to me. And so that really piqued my interest. And so I've known for a little while that perhaps a more traditional corporate route wasn't necessarily sort of where I was going to take my career. And so, yeah, I sort of dove headfirst into startups. So I got to very by chance to meet a person after a conference here in Auckland, and I just wrapped up my contract at the Cricket World Cup. And what happened was I'd sort of given this person my details at the drinks, and she said, "Oh, look, my fiance could be interested in getting in a marketing guy like you." And I was like, "Okay, really cool." Whatever. I was a young 22-year-old at that time, and didn't really think much of it. And then I got a call, about a day later, and I was back in Wellington. And it was this gentleman, CB Woodhouse, who had just wrapped up his restraints of trade after his sale of Orcon. And so gives me this call. He says, "Hey, look, my fiance met you. She's really keen to have a chat. And she thought that you'd be a good fit. So how about we get lunch?" So I met CB at what used to be Shed 10. I'm not sure if it's still there, but reasonably, upmarket restaurant for lunch. And he sort of outlined this new company he was building. And I was a young and probably overly confident young man, and I gave him my thoughts. I just shared pretty directly, how I think about it and how I tackle sort of the marketing for it, I guess. I wasn't necessarily looking for a job. I was just sort of sharing my unsolicited thoughts. And at the end of the lunch, he said, "Hey, look, I'd like you to come work for me." And he had never seen my CV or anything like that. And I was like, "Okay, give me a couple of weeks. I need to pack up my life here and find a place to live in Auckland." And he said, "Well, actually, I'd love for you to come work for me next week. And so you can just live in the other wing of my mansion." And so that's what I did. I packed up my life.
Because he already had an exit.
Yep. He had sold Orcon for
that's right. And
around
the trade had ended, and then right. That's a really interesting experience. You were there for over a year. But talk a little bit about, I guess, what it was like working for a founder that had also had. It's interesting. It was your first. Especially, it was your first role, so you had no experience. But I guess now you can talk in hindsight. But founders have different arcs, right? And you have a different level of confidence, perhaps when you've sold something, right? And you've made a lot of mistakes the first time, and like you said, you can make these decisions like, "Oh, well, just come live with me."
Yeah.
So can you talk to me a little bit about being kind of like you were basically the actual the chief of staff kind of is that what it's called now? Are we actually
I guess,
that's
yeah. I was a bit of a jack of all trades. My primary focus was, marketing.
yeah,
But my
yeah,
desk
right.
at
But
that
you
time was directly outside CB's door, so he
yeah.
could. Um,
Because we got a chief of staff guy that's primary marketing, but
yep,
actually, he's picking up multiple hats. He's very close to me, very close to our COO, and a real great asset in the team. And the cool thing for the chief of staff, or you in this example, right, is that you get a front row seat without the responsibility in a way.
for sure. And it was crazy, right? Like, we I did all sorts of things that I'd never kind of even fathomed that I would be across or doing in my career. Where we acquired about three or four separate companies at that time. I worked with our wholesale salespeople on building out like channel partnerships.
Mm.
And then sort of off the back of that, we ended up doing about 14 to 1,500% revenue growth on the year. And at that time, back in 2014, that was enough to be named the fastest growing company in New Zealand and win the Deloitte Fast 50. And yeah,
And how did you achieve that? Like, what was the day to day like? How did you get that momentum and that ball rolling?
it was, I guess, one of the things that would happen day to day is CB was quite clear in his vision, and he would be able to articulate what he wanted, and he'd be able to base it based on like past precedent, right?
Mm.
And so he'd set out the vision, and then he had this team where we would go and sort of enable the vision in a way. And what my day to day looked like could be almost anything really. We opened new data centers, organized PR for visits of high profile people. I'd be running building out marketing collateral for our wholesale partners. We'd be looking at
Mm.
at that time, it was still hot and sexy, but voice over IP as a product as well. And, these sorts of things, these forces sort of came together where, like, it was a really interesting case study and sort of this fit, product market fit. And what was cool was that I got to see it all sort of coalesce in a way and sort of see the vision take shape. Because when you're in the moment, more often than not, what you find is it can feel a little bit like disparate threads in a way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think would you say that it was very clear that there was product market fit initially, like just immediately?
Yeah, I think, what was cool, and this has certainly helped guide some of my future career afterward, where it was there's a very clear focus at Voyager on focusing on like a very specific niche. They weren't trying to be everything to everyone. And so to paint a little bit of context, when CB had founded Orcon at that time, there were about five ISPs in the market. By the time he got to founding Voyager, there were approximately 200 plus in New Zealand.
Wow.
And that's a really interesting sort of like move in terms of the market, the way these other market forces had happened where, um, you know, the wholesale rate from Chorus was more generous in a way, and the interconnectivity was really interesting. And sort of at that time as well, we have to keep in mind that fibre was still sort of in its infancy in New Zealand, and in New Zealand in particular, we really, really benefited from a pretty good rollout of fibre. If you take a look across the ditch at our friends in Australia, they're still really struggling, and they're still trying to roll out NBN.
Yeah, I always laugh at that. I used to play a lot of esports with Australians when I first got here, and that was always a bit of a joke, playing with them after coming from Europe, especially as well.
Oh no.
Yeah, okay, cool. And then and so, like in that year, do you feel like you got more years in terms of experience? Did like time move at a different pace, or?
I certainly think so. I think genuinely, startup years are like dog years in a way. I'm pretty sure
Yeah,
you've
right.
probably heard that. And I wouldn't have had. It would take me a decade to get the same level of exposure and experience, and perhaps even proximity to the CEO within a larger corporate. And
Has it helped you get upward mobility? Um, has it helped you get upward mobility with your career in terms of like being able to kind of get better compensation packages and stuff like that and build your wealth once you had that on your resume?
For sure. I think that having I'm really big on having people having done the doing, right? Like this, and I think having something like that on my resume, especially after the Cricket World Cup, I had a couple strong bows at my disposal, and when I had this super increased sort of market awareness. I knew what compensation packages were out there. I knew that, for a young, despite being at that time 23, 24, when I was looking for my next thing, I knew that, a lot of people my age at that time were earning maybe 50, 60K if they were lucky. But for someone with that skill set and that experience, it sort of up leveled me dramatically and sort of opened a number of doors.
Yeah, for sure. So, kind of if we fast forward now today, I guess a little bit more to like currently what you're working on, your what you're doing personally, and then obviously you've got your role at Landlord Studio as well, which is a big role. So how do you feel about kind of juggling kind of, I guess, hustling and building your own equity through advisory or being the founder of on-demand marketing impact?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of what I guess the way I kind of view it is my risk appetite is probably not everyone's, I'll be honest. And that's, due to a number of factors where I'm very, my origin story, is such that perhaps, I've taken quite a different route to a lot of people in that I'm appreciative of the hustle. I don't have a plan B. This is it, right? And so my leaning towards startups is also driven by the fact that you can get options and equity, and that upside is exponential. Something I learned really early on in my career was people don't get rich from their salary. You can get a salary and invest it hopefully wisely, for sure, and be responsible. But those sort of outlier returns, those sorts of swings that help create exponential growth lie outside of some of those more traditional routes, if you will. So
startup equity was always a big personal focus of yours.
for sure, that's a really big driver and sort of why I feel like I still, play in the space. And what you see often is, I hire new people, perhaps they're fresh to the software industry or startups in general. I think a lot of people, might dismiss the idea of ESOP or options, but if you are committed to this thing for the long term and you're confident in your ability to help, input on
Have an
a
impact.
positive result,
Yeah.
you know, there's no reason not to back yourself, honestly.
Mm.
I'm a big believer in people that want to come on the journey, and when I
Yeah,
join
for sure.
companies, I definitely look for that. I look for those sorts of opportunities where I feel like my input is could help produce a good result.
Yeah, right. Awesome. Yeah, that's so cool. So what initially kind of led you to be interested in the Landlord Studio and the problem they're solving and how you're going to impact that?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a really interesting sort of story for us here, where as a Kiwi company, we're founded and headquartered here in New Zealand. But I'd say about 95% of our revenue comes from between the US and the UK right now.
Yeah, right.
And it's a
That's
funny
awesome.
thing because in New Zealand, I think the idea of real estate investing and the is always seen as a no-brainer. It's high returns, you get tax relief, all these sorts of good things. And the way I guess I view it is there's a massive opportunity for disruption in what we do, where we provide a platform for landlords to help self-manage their own properties. Where traditionally, and this isn't me bagging on property managers by any means, but traditionally their role is sort of seen as like a sort of middleman layer, where what value are they adding? Like they're
Mm,
collecting your rent, maybe the maybe answering maintenance requests, and we thought, and what I think is really unique and cool is that we help empower landlords to take back some of that um, time and money in particular as well. And more often than not, a lot of companies might charge 20% a year in terms of the rent fees and for their management, and we we think that there's a ripe opportunity for disruption across not just the US but also the UK, where there's also regulatory changes that are happening for landlords there, where um,
mm,
at the moment they're working through a thing called making tax digital, where basically any landlord that earns rental income has to have a digital record keeping system instead of a
right.
spreadsheet. And I think having, if you've spent any amount of time around any kind of SaaS company, more often than not, their biggest competitor is a spreadsheet.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Interesting.
so, well, yeah, we've got a really, really interesting opportunity ahead of us, and that's kind of what excites me.
Mm. Yeah, and how do you approach marketing that sort of product, that B2B, but it's kind of like independent sole trader almost, or maybe often cases. So, what sort of channels do you guys use? How have you thought about kind of? I guess it's quite an established business now. It's not like Voyager where you're starting up.
Mhm.
But I guess at this kind of stage, like, how do you think about the landscape of kind of marketing something that's quite established? Like, how's the dynamic?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think the way I like to sort of break it out is when I think about, I often try to think about this in terms of reverse engineering a result, right? So if I were a landlord, how would I need this message to get to me? What channels would am I using, etc. Right? And I realize that sounds relatively reductive, but I think a lot of marketing isn't sort of doing magic. It's just meeting people at the right time with the right message. There's any number of metrics you can use and data points, like the average B2B buyer takes about 9 to 10 touches before they fill out a form on your website.
Yeah,
For this
right.
particular company, and this is another unique sort of wrinkle, is that it's a product-led growth company. So we don't have salespeople um, answering form requests, or we don't have an SDR calling you to qualify your lead necessarily. Um, and so when people come in, they can self-serve their onboarding, they work through their trial period, and then hopefully, if everything goes well, they subscribe, right? And
Mm.
I think that's a relatively unique dynamic here as well, where a lot of SaaS companies in New Zealand in particular are very sales led. And so it's kind of a really cool opportunity for a marketer like myself to get my hands dirty on a product led company. And um, I guess the traditional behavior as well probably isn't as B2B as I guess you could imagine, where there might, for a traditional B2B company, there might be quite heavy like LinkedIn usage or etc.
Yeah.
etc.
Well, they're
Whereas like
actually consumers that are running a business on the side, right? Often. So
exactly.
yeah, it's
Um,
quite interesting. So product led in terms of then how getting people to have awareness of the brand. What have you guys done in that regards? Like, have you gone heavy into, the ad platforms, or have you tried to find other unique ways to get, visibility?
yeah, that's a good question. And so a lot of our journey to date has been driven by organic search. But we went really heavy early in SEO and content. And so,
Mm.
and once again, it doesn't, it feels reductive, but like, if you're putting out content that is of value, that isn't a transactional piece, I'm not having to gate this checklist or this white paper or whatever, where you're putting out genuine content that helps build that trust and helps educate the market. You're helping take people on that journey. And so a lot of the early growth was definitely driven by organic and SEO. And then sort of in later years, especially since we've started rolling, sort of layering in a few more wrinkles into that sort of marketing mix in terms of paid, in terms of, um, partnership channels, in terms of leveraging our networks in that way, but also looking at exploring other means now, right? I think there's certainly lessons from those early Facebook years and early Google years, where there are certain people and certain companies that made hay while the sun shone on those particular ad platforms. And so one of the things that I think is a very hot topic in marketing right now is AEO or GEO or
Yeah.
whatever you want to
Yeah.
call it.
From the
Um,
LLMs.
from the LLMs. And I think that as time goes on, you'll see that sort of ratio of the meta Google spend shifting off platform toward maybe investing in, going back to almost the roots of building out organic content for your sites and getting cited and doing all these sorts of things like community. And like, one of the biggest signals for LLMs is often places like Reddit, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Quora, Reddit.
exactly.
That's an interesting game. Interesting. Yeah, I read a few books a couple of years ago on product-led approaches and businesses. I can't remember the names, but it was one Christmas. It was actually when ChatGPT came out. I was looking at product-led and what that meant. So I had a lot of fun looking into that. Interesting stuff. So, what do you think for the next 5 years in terms of your wealth? Like, obviously, you've negotiated some equity in Landlord Studio, and that's like your core. So
Yep.
if you were to, would you say that you have a very specific strategy about how you're trying to incrementally level up, like, or is it just like, but a little bit by feel?
No, I feel like when I was a bit younger, for sure, it was definitely sort of, follow your nose, doing it by feel. And then over time, right, like, not everything's a success. You take your
Sure.
licks.
Yeah.
And I think one of the real hallmarks is being able to learn from some of the things that maybe misfire. I think, right now, in terms of what the next 5 years looks like in terms of wealth creation for myself, it's about being quite a lot more intentional with the way I direct my resources. So equity certainly makes up a proportion of it. I invest privately, and then obviously within the equity markets myself. And then on top of that, real estate is making up a proportion. I foresee as well. And yeah, it's kind of balancing the books a little bit more so that you're not just taking home run swings every single time and hoping something lands. And I think that's obviously probably a little bit more towards my benefit in terms of the way I sort of foresee the way I want to apply that wealth as well. It's not just sort of creating it, it's the way you want to apply it. And so creating, a safety net for my family and for,
Yeah.
those I love is really important to me as well.
That's really cool. Awesome. Nice. And, you did this leveling up game early. You were young. You had one nice little gotcha on your resume, which was the Cricket World Cup. I mean, I would like, because I see this a lot right now, there's been a kind of a little bit of a culling, right, of certain parts of the workforce over the last couple of years, especially. And we've got a lot of grads that are techno literate, are well onto the biggest trends. They know how to use the technology. They're young and got the energy to do the thing and make the shaking, but they're finding it hard to find roles, right? And get that seat at the table. I personally took risk when I wanted to move out of the jewelry manufacturing business into startups, and I went and basically worked for Equity for 18 months in a startup in the US. What do you think about, and how do you suggest people approach getting their first run on the table? And is there, is it better to just be in the game and kind of give, or find any way to get a seat at the table, or do you just wait for a role? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
because it's a very weird time where everything's moving very quickly, and if you're not in the game for 6 months, it's almost like you've missed a year and a half.
Yep. No, I 1000% agree. And one of my things for people with what we would call this as a cold start problem, right? Like they don't know where to start. That it's hard getting your foot in the door. And for myself, that was certainly the case without a marketing degree or any real marketing experience. And so, and my story is probably not for everyone in that I took an unpaid internship
Right.
initially, and I worked about three part-time jobs simultaneously. Um, some of them were a bit quirkier than others, you could say. And then I found a way to sort of generate the experience. And so I guess the real core tenet there is being able to generate the experience, right? Like if you don't have marketing experience, create the marketing experience. Like go out, build your own business. I think we have all the tools in the world at low cost to be able to go spin up a product online, a digital service, and be able to provide value. Like one of the things I see a lot, especially in marketing, is the way the generational understanding of social media for people that are entering the workforce is so much more sophisticated than people with my level of experience, frankly. Like, if I could turn back the clock, if I was going to hire like a social media marketer, honestly, my first port of call would probably be the quad at Auckland Uni. I'd just sit there with a free Domino's pizza and wait for someone that was just chronically online. Um,
Interesting.
I think, we've got tools now like Lovable. We've got, the ways to generate process payments, which was one of the biggest friction points in terms of starting an online business before. I genuinely think paint your own picture. Don't let someone else dictate that for you. I feel quite passionate about that because not everyone gets the opportunity to get a look in. Not everyone has the network to, open their doors for them. And having come from that sort of path myself, I'm a big believer in being able to create your own opportunity.
Yeah, awesome. Well, this has been really cool. Thank you so much for taking the time today, Matt. I've I've learned a lot, and I think your story is really cool, and I totally resonate with the path that you've taken and how you're trying to deliver you're actually kind of looking for things to do and deliver outcomes right through these businesses you're working for, but then you're also kind of strategic about it. And I think that it's so much nicer when you've got a bit of purpose, you know, and you're building something that's a bit bigger than yourself. And I think there's you kind of got to be able to put yourself in a position to get lucky as well.
Yep.
Right, it's like that whole thing of, you know, you've got to be in the metaphoric hand in order to win it.
Yep.
And yeah, that's really cool. So thank you so much for taking the time. And yeah, I wish you all the best.
No, I appreciate it. It was great to chat.
Cheers, man.